What?
All right, we're on to the next one here. Looks like this is another CephFS one, quota support discussion and quotas versus subtrees. Looks like we've combined a couple of blueprints here. So is this Yunchuan? Probably butchering that name.
Yeah.
I suppose you can give us a rundown of the first blueprint, and then who had the second one? Was it Josh?
That's me.
You. Okay. Oh, Josh is the next one. Right. All right. Well, I guess we'll start with blueprint 1, and then Sage can jump in later.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. This blueprint is come from CDS pipeline. I plan to explain how I implement my blueprint. In our design, quota check happened in the client, and MDS only need to record quota settings. For the current implementation, the quota information will be bound to the directory. When applications create a file or directory, the client will iterate the file's parent directory, parent's parent directory, to look up all the quota information and R state. If a client found the quota exceeded, the operator will be blocked and return a quota. My implementation. So in this solution, quota check will not be very precision. It means quota will be exceeded when much write create operations happen too frequently or happened from much clients in the same time, because the MDS haven't pushed the fresh update to client in time. That's all.
Okay. So this branch has been awaiting review for a while, and has been reviewed a couple times. So I think yeah. So I think that I'm pretty happy with the basic approach, which is probably expected since I think we talked about it a while ago, and having the client enforce the quotas and so forth. I think the only real concern we have right now, or the only concern that I have right now, is how the quota subtrees are being tracked, which is why there's the other session with the same subject, the quota subtrees. Because right now, I think what we added, what did we do? We added a field in the inode stat reply indicating which quota file directory it was under. Is that what it was? Do you remember? Do you remember? Okay. I mean, basically, the client has to know what directory each file is underneath, or which directory the quota is set at. So it has to know if the /home/user has the quota set. It needs to know all the inodes that belong to that directory, so that it knows which rstat to check to see if it's exceeded the quota. And so if I remember correctly, we just added a field to the MDS message to the client that says this inode belongs underneath this directory. But the problem is that if you rename it, or if you rename, then that doesn't get updated, and so the quota stuff isn't enforced correctly if there's a rename, which is probably not that big a problem in general, as long as it mostly works most of the time. But I think eventually we want it to be sort of correct, which means we need a way to know what files belong to which quota, so that we're checking the right thing. So I think that's the main challenge that we'll talk about next, because it might be that we can unify this with the quota subtrees. The other thing, though, that when Jung was reviewing this, he saw that he did some basic tests and it just didn't. Jung, are you listening? I can't remember if it was that it didn't enforce it at all, or if it just took a long time before the quota started to kick in.
It works sometimes. It's not reliable. Sometimes works, sometimes not.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the question is why. There's always going to be some ability to go past the quota because it's not a strict check, but are the heuristics not good enough, or is there some change we need to make in the basic algorithm to make it more reliable? So in your test, Yunchuan, like what did you, how quickly was it able to stop a writer when you hit the quota?
I forget.
You forget, yeah.
Maybe a few tens of seconds.
Tens of seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. That doesn't seem that bad. I guess it depends on how big the quota is. If your quota is 100 megabytes, then that's a long time. But if your quota is, 100 gigabytes, then that's fine. Were there other concerns that you had, Jung, besides just how long it took?
My concern is that the subtree based quota is not reliable, because the whole approach is not clean and elegant. So I'm worried about it will cause a lot of trouble for us.
Because of renames?
No, not just really. Because the quota does not work reliable. Sometimes it works, sometimes not, and the basic algorithm is also not very good. So I think if we merge it, you will complain why it doesn't work as expected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, it depends on what the goal is, right? If the goal is to stop them at exactly the quota, then that's a hard thing to do. If the goal is to prevent a user from filling up the file system, then it would still accomplish that. It would stop them at about 100 gigabytes and not at exactly 100 gigabytes. So if it's advertised as such.
Yeah.
Is the latency with which it's enforced just the same as what we have for propagating our stats? Is it the same delay?
It's
yes.
Partly it's that, plus it's that it has to get propagated up to the parent on the MDS, but then also it has to get shared with the client so the client knows that it has to stop writing. But I think we changed it so that as soon as you cross the threshold for what the actual limit is, it forces a broadcast to all the clients, so that they all know that it crossed over the limit and they should stop. I think we did that. I can't remember. Yeah, broadcast quota to client. Or at least we could change it to do that, so that the last shared yeah, if it's over the limit, then it'll always broadcast it. And if it's under the limit, but it's like made it another like not order of magnitude, but like a quarter, half, eighth, whatever, another segment, whatever, closer to what the limit is, then it'll also share it. So that as you get closer to the limit, the client will know and it can have less sturdy data in flight. But there's always going to be the RStat propagation delay in the MDS that contributes. So I think that you could tune how quickly RStats propagate on the MDS, and that would help. I think it's like 10 seconds or something by default. I forget, per level of the hierarchy.
What if we, within the MDS, propagated up the tree not just the size, but the max size that had been allocated to clients, so that at the point of enforcing the quota, we could start broadcasting things when the issued size limit reaches the limit, rather than when the actual size does. It's still soft, but it would be faster.
We talked about that, but I mean, you might be able to do a little bit better, but the problem is that it's not just the sum of all the max sizes isn't super helpful, because you could have 20 files open. Sorry, that's you, Lee. Sorry, you could have 20 files open. Do you mind muting, Lee? Yeah, thanks. You could have 20 files open, and you might be close to the quota, but it doesn't mean you want to give like each file 1/20th of the ability to write. You still want to be able to write that last amount to one file.
Right. I was just thinking you would use that as the trigger, not for blocking anything, but for starting to do this continuous broadcast of the size. But I'm not sure it's necessarily that valuable.
We don't persist the max size delta in the RStat. I guess we could, because the max size is persisted. So I mean, that could be added, and that might help.
I don't know. More generally, if it's soft, it's soft. I don't think we should hold it up on the basis that it's not that strict. Although it would be really nice to have an automated test for this, so that we at least knew the bounds.
Yeah. I guess that's I think the main thing that I'd want to see is a test or a set of tests that show that it works, at least eventually. Which I guess we could just write a few scripts that set a create a directory tree and set a limit, and then write some data, and then show that eventually we hit an error. Yeah. So I guess the other question. Well, okay. So there were a couple specific concerns that came up as far as how frequently we were broadcasting, but I think that those were addressed. There was something with the clustered MDS, but I think that's also addressed. There is one point that that Jung pointed out where the quota check isn't done for truncate. So when you're actually writing data, it'll eventually block write, but you can truncate an object to be really big, and it doesn't stop that. I think we probably want to close that gap since we're going off file size and not file blocks. Yeah. But I guess for me it's really the having a test and it's off by default. You don't have to use it. Sort of advertising it as soft is enough for me. But I'm curious if other people are concerned about the other parts of it. So John, Greg, Jung.
Yeah. Another thing we talked yesterday is that setting the quota for allowing setting quota for each directory is too complex. I mean, we should use quota in more restricted way. For example, mark a directory and as a subwollen, then only allow setting quota to subwollen. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the next section.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about. So we could, I guess, defer final judgment until then. But are there other pieces that people are worried about?
Looked at the code at all, but the fact that it's soft doesn't bother me.
No. Okay. Thanks. Okay.
Lee, was there something you were trying to say?
I think it's just probably in the same room. Okay. Well, let's move on to the other thing, because I think that's sort of the beyond just overall design approach or whatever. I think the second question is whether how we should fit it in with the view of subvolumes, and whether that we need to do all that first before we can merge it, or if we can sort of graft it onto that once it's ready. I guess is sort of the big decision that it would be great to get to a decision point on. So we can just combine. Oh, they're already combined. Okay. So the second blueprint, I wrote up a bit to sort of summarize. So the basic idea is that, well, the observation is that in order for the sort of tracking to be correct in terms of what files contribute to which quota, the client needs to have that sort of structure that links all the inodes that are in that quota subtree to a structure that links them all together for that subtree, subvolume, whatever. And we do exactly the same thing for snapshots using the snap realm data structure. And so this patch set doesn't replicate that complexity. It's a little bit complex, and so it doesn't do that. It's not worth it yet. But I think at the same time, one of the main issues with snapshots is that dealing with those snap subtrees is kind of complicated, at least for some of the cases that snapshots need to handle when you're renaming directories. So although the basic stuff works, the whole set of things that need to be done in order for completely flexible snapshots anywhere to work don't work. So the idea is that if we reuse that basic tracking though, and instead of a snap realm, we call it a subvolume, and we restrict it so that you, for example, can't rename things out of one subvolume into another subvolume. But you can sort of say, I want to create a subvolume at this point in the tree, my home directory, for example, and you can create them, and you can turn something into a subvolume or convert it back out of a subvolume as long as it doesn't have any special stuff in it. Then you still give administrators and users the flexibility to decide what's a subvolume and what's not, and they can create them wherever they want with existing data. But then you can avoid all of the complicated operations that make snapshots and subdirectories complicated. And if you did that, and you could then use that same subvolume concept for quotas. So you could create a subvolume for your directory and set the quota on it, and eventually create snapshots on that directory. And it would be the same set of code that's tracking the inode membership within a subvolume that would handle that sort of piece of the problem. It's sort of done in a not quite correct way currently. So that's the basic idea. It turns out that the things that snapshots do are a little bit different than the things that quotas do, and the way that they'll restrict operations are a little bit different. So I'm not totally convinced that it's exactly the right fit, but I want to go through it with you guys to see if it makes enough sense to be worthwhile, both in terms of what we want to do now and what we'll eventually want to do with snapshots.
So I guess the main thing you get in common between them is the concept of a realm or subvolume membership for inodes. So it's the mechanism for pushing out to clients when some nodes that they've got in cache become a member or not a member of one of these things. So I think that's quite a compelling argument for having them be the same mechanism, because for a lot of systems it might actually be unused a lot of the time, and having one field there rather than two would be a nice efficiency.
Yep. Yes. So yeah, that's the main thing. And we can unify we could probably actually just take some of the messages and rename them and rename some of the fields, and that would sort of the end result would be reasonably clean in the code. The trick is that the way that subvolumes restrict you or don't restrict you is a little bit different for subvolumes, or for snapshots and for quotas. So in the case of, let's say that we hijack that mechanism and we recall it a subvolume instead of a snap realm, and we make it an administrator operation to say, I want to turn this directory into a subvolume, or unmake it a subvolume or whatever. That's all fine. We can reuse the basic existing machinery to track the ownership of inodes to subvolumes. But in the case of quotas, if we create quotas on that subvolume, then there's no reason to prevent users from renaming stuff into the subvolume and out of it. We can have one of the whole things that this whole thing buys us is that there's this operation that will, when you rename a single inode or a whole chunk of the whole directory of inodes, there's a message that enumerates which inodes get changed ownership to the other realm, and it can actually do that. And so that would be allowed. Whereas in the snapshot case, the thing that is biting us right now that works mostly, but not in sort of this annoying corner case, is that you can't do that. So eventually, hopefully, we'll fix that, and then just on the snapshot side, you'd have that flexibility. But initially, we would have this situation where you would be able to rename stuff out of a subvolume if it doesn't have any snapshots on it, and you wouldn't be able to if it did, for example. Just sort of.
I guess I was thinking of the restriction on snapshot operations being a bit more fine-grained than that. So, like, we'd want to restrict things like creating snapshots within snapshots, moving directories that are subvolumes into other subvolumes.
Yeah,
but moving normal files which happen to have been part of a snapshot, I guess I was assuming that we would continue to support that even within the subvolume case. That may have been an optimistic assumption.
I can't remember actually if a file is treated differently than a subdirectory. I think it's not. I think it turns into like a single inode realm. But that's essentially the complicated part, because if you have a file lives in one snap realm for a while and it gets like snapshots A, B, and C to apply to it, and then you rename it or a directory containing it into somewhere else, and then you snapshot it more, then you have the past snapshots from its previous location in the tree that apply to it and the snapshots from the new location in the tree that make this complicated sort of historical directed acyclic graph that makes things annoying. Not impossible, but just annoying in a way that we haven't fully sorted out yet. But it might be that we should just ignore the snapshot thing. And so if you have a subvolume that has snapshots in it, then we don't even turn on snapshots by default because there are other issues. And so that'll sort of incur extra restrictions. And we just worry about the general case. But in which case it would be fine, I guess. So if the subvolume has snapshots, you would restrict these operations. If it doesn't, you would let the user rename stuff into and out of different quota trees.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction here between operations that are inconvenient for us to support, but we would like to, and operations that we actually never want to support. So like snapshots within snapshots, I think we're okay with never supporting that.
I don't know. Maybe. I kind of like that.
I'm going to go out there. I have a total emotional connection to our snapshots the way we've just been describing them for 5 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's going to end up being reasonable, but I mean, the idea of sort of unifying the realms so that we have a realm structure that different stuff can grab onto is nice, but I'm not sure that I want us to be talking about a replacement when no one can remember how the existing ones actually work.
I remember most of it. Well, okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the nesting snapshots means that you can have like snapshots on the root directory every day or week or something. And you could also, in your home directory, snapshot your mail folder before you go and delete a bunch of messages or something, right? So I think having that sort of layered snapshot thing is pretty cool. And I still think that it can be done. But there are just a couple of issues that need to be sorted out. But that's okay. We'll get there. So the only other road bump, I think, with sort of unifying these realms is that what happens if you say you have subvolumes, you have two subvolumes and they're different quota trees, and you just want to rename a subdirectory from one of them to another. In that case, it's a simple matter of taking the inodes and changing their owner, their parent, or whatever, just moving them from one tree to another, right? Whereas in the snapshot case, the fact that you've moved something from one realm to another creates a new, fresh realm that's just that moved subtree that has a parent set to the new one, because it has a past parent of the old one, and you need to remember that those old snapshots applied to it at that previous point in time. So renaming subdirectories in the snapshot case tends to multiply it, make this proliferate the number of realms, whereas in the quota case, you don't care, you don't need to do that. Which means that I think if we unify the structure, then we would probably still call it a realm or a sub-subtree or something. But there would be some of them that are sort of these implicit trees that were created to carry around snapshot metadata, but are sort of hidden from the user. But there would be other ones that are sort of first-class subtrees that the user created and that the quota is applied to, and so on. And at the point at which you have sort of two types of these things that you're trying to unify for two purposes, I'm no longer completely sure that it pays off.
So you'd still be able
in
to, you'd
particular-
still make a statement that your node was in one particular realm, but you'd have to follow up your parent realms to find the next sort of
Yeah, it might be
official
two
concrete
realms
realm.
up. Yeah, that might be 2 realms up that it's a subvolume where you're actually allowed to create the sub snapshots, whereas some of the realms are sort of these implicit ones that were created because of renames.
Sounds like this. If this is actually going to turn out to be a good idea, then it will be not too difficult to convert, and we'll make it work better once we do. But that doesn't mean we should block merging it.
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
I agree. We shouldn't block anything on it.
Yep. Okay.
I mean, maybe there are other reasons to block it, but I don't think this is one of them.
Okay. Well, that makes me happy because that's how I feel too. So I think the one thing I want to confirm is that the one I'm pretty sure that what we're doing with in this quota branch is that the quota info and the client reply is we just added like an inode node which just says like what the root of the quota tree is, and it's kind of the client's job to stat that at regular intervals, even though it doesn't actually know for sure that it's still part of that subtree. So it's kind of sloppy. But in the absence of this like structured subtree realm concept thing, then that's all you can really do. Which I think doesn't really bother me. But I want to make sure it doesn't bother me. I don't think it'll be hard to clean up later.
You're getting like the number of the parent realm, not the realm of the parent quota tree when you get the initial caps on an item.
Yeah, and it's actually in every message. It's like it's the encode inode. It's the same structure that you always. It's the only way that metadata passes to the client. It's just part of that structure.
So does that mean it gets updated by cap messages when it changes?
Yeah. I can't remember if it. I think it might not get updated by a cap message, but it would get updated the next time you stat the inode. So if you
would it be
in the worst
hard
case,
to put it in caps? Because I mean, in that case, then it's sort of the same time lag as the enforcement is anyway.
I don't think it would be. But I'm also not sure we care that much. I mean, essentially what this means is that if you have a file that you create in a directory where you don't have a quota applied, and you rename it into a directory where a quota does apply, you'll be able to keep writing to it. Which, I don't know, it doesn't seem like that big a deal to me, because I think usually the places where these quotas really matter is when you're trying to like shut down the entire user. Like, say you have, you'd set the quota on every user's home directory, and they would run their jobs out of there. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe
I think a lot of the places where you actually do want them though for these things is like in job directories rather than on users.
Exactly. Right.
And a lot of times those jobs will be like moving data, or not the job, but like a piece of a job will be in one place and then it will get moved to the next location, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if like step 2 in the processing pipeline is the one that you're trying to control because it's often goes wild, then if it was in step 1 and then gets moved into step 2 and the client doesn't know that, then the control isn't very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have like different quotas for different stages of the computation.
I mean, this isn't a thing I do, but that's one of the scenarios I think I remember people talking about being a problem. It's like,
that's a pretty good point.
Like we have a scientific computing app, and sometimes, depending on the input, then it just goes wild.
Yeah. And I guess you could also imagine a case where you are a lowly grad student with a quota on your home directory, and you realize that if you create the file in /temp and then rename it, the quota doesn't apply. Then you will probably abuse that fact. Whatever. Okay. Well, that shouldn't be hard, I think. Just adding the field to the client caps message. And when we, on the client, when we get that, if it's different than what we had, then we'll do the put qtree, get qtree thing to map it to the other qtree structure.
We're about 5 minutes over, so is that one
okay?
Pretty covered?
I think so. I just want to make sure we have a succinct list of things that we actually want to do before this is merged. And I think that's just, it's the add qtree root to caps message, and it's some simple test cases that demonstrate it works. The bash scripts, I think, would be fine. And is there anything else? Do you think it's important that we handle truncate? So if you try to truncate to something that's obviously past your quota, it'll just say ed quote. Is it too weird that a truncate operation that normally doesn't write data and isn't expected to?
I don't think it would be too weird to enforce it, but could go either way.
Like if you look at the man page for truncate, I bet dquote is probably not on there. I think that's
Quota itself is weird because it does not track the used size instead.
It's the file size. Yeah. Yep. And that's sort of, yeah. Then we need to rebase on master.
Let's see what Leah's saying in the chat.
Mm-mm. Oh, other chat.
Blue Jeans chat, yeah.
Yeah, we cannot do accurate truncate check. I mean, we can't do any, and none of these checks are perfectly accurate. It's just like after the fact. You want to eventually stop them. Yeah. Yeah, so I think we probably shouldn't worry about truncate because it's sort of impossible anyway. Okay.
Were you taking notes on an Etherpad somewhere, Sage?
I wrote them in the pull request because I had that window open.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
So there are a few notes there. So the only there's one weird patch in here that's dealing with the case where you mount a subdirectory. We're gonna have the exact same problem when we deal with like any permission type stuff, like subtree based permissions or other things that are subtree based. So I'm not too concerned about that as long as it's not sort of obviously broken. But I think that we should have a test. I think we should have a test for it. I think that would be a good thing to add anyway. So, okay.
Cool.
All right.